very much. I haven't talked about the medicine wheel on the air at all, so that'd be a lot of fun.
Oh, great. Well, um, Jim Willis, thank you very much for joining me once again. I'm really happy to speak with you once more to tap into your personal Akashic field and
Thank you,
and
thank
to
you.
and to join both of our consciousnesses together to see what sparks shine. So welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Rafa. Appreciate it. Good to be with you always.
Great. Hey, so as we were just talking before we started recording, we could. I was. You sent me a book of yours, and
Mhm.
I've been reading a little bit of it. And particularly, I was interested in knowing a bit more about your medicine wheel and the medicine wheel in general, the idea,
Yeah.
because you mentioned that in where you live, you sometimes go to the one you've built there, and I was
Mhm.
super interested and curious of what it is and what it's for.
Oh, well, that's a long story, but it's a story that really marks the last 10 years of our lives here. When we came here, we really I didn't know anything about dowsing. I didn't know anything about earth energy. Um, my spirituality was based in a had been based my whole life on Christianity, and I had been moving farther and farther away from standard Christianity because we wanted to really confront that essential spirituality that our ancestors knew so well. So when we came out here to the woods, the idea was simply to get away from it. We knew we were attracted to this place, but didn't really know why. My wife has always been attracted to rocks, and there was quartz all over the ground through the woods here. And we discovered later that we actually live right now on what was a very ancient stone quarry going back maybe as much as 30, 35,000 years, or maybe even more, where the ancients would come and gather up the blanks that they would need to make the tools they would need for the coming year. It was a well-known place apparently in those times because it was right near the Savannah River, and the people would follow the rivers. And we, being on not quite the banks, but just inland from where the Savannah River was, on a kind of it's a bay, I suppose you might say, that once was a major tributary for the Savannah River, and it was up high with the river down below, so it would have been a great place to camp and gather. What we didn't know at the time was that there were other things than just the quartz that drew the people here. There is an earth energy that, until I learned how to dowse, I never knew anything about earth energies. And after we'd been here for about 2 or 3 years, and I had taken up dowsing just almost by coincidence, I just was something I was interested in. We discovered a very powerful energy line. And it turns out that it is actually a ley line, a straight line that runs all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean up near Seattle. And as we trace it as well as we can, tracing a line that long over a flat map, you can't get it exact, but you can get close. And it was amazing how many ancient sites it passed through all along, from the Mississippi mound building cultures out to the Great Medicine Wheel out in the Dakotas. Well, one day, two friends of ours who were very attuned to earth energy were visiting us, and they discovered this place down below us in the valley, right down below our house, where our house is now. They discovered this place that it really spoke to them, and they found a tremendous energy, and I began to find it myself. So I went down there after they pointed it out to me. I went down with my dowsing rods and began to dowse, and we discovered a place where energy just seems to be upwelling, uplifting from the ground. And so when I dowsed it, it was, roughly 16 feet or so across, something like that. And my dowsing rods would take me in a circle right around the edge of it. And we decided this would be a perfect place to build a medicine wheel. Now, of course, a
Sorry,
medicine wheel, pardon
just,
me, yeah.
yeah, just for clarification, dowsing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. That was another that was another thing. I had seen people dowsing for water before, but frankly, I never believed in it. I thought it was just a um, some kind of a trick or something like that. But I had seen people do it, and I was interested. But I always kind of put it in that pseudoscience idea that it didn't really make any sense to me. And I thought, well, this is what crazy people believe in, I suppose. So fine, that kind of thing. So one day, I don't know why, I woke up in the morning and I decided I want to learn how to dowse for water. I didn't know anything about it. So I went on the internet and I found a couple of internet sites that said if I could get some dowsing rods. Well, I didn't have any dowsing rods, and in South Carolina, where I live, there was no place to buy dowsing rods. But I went down to the local hardware store and got myself a couple of copper wire in the thickest, the biggest copper I could get, and cut them into two 18-inch sections and uh, formed them into what they call L rods because they look like the letter L. And when you hold them in your hands and you go over water, theoretically they'll either cross or go apart. For some reason, some people they cross. For others, they move apart. So I went out looking for water, and I struck out totally, found nothing. I even went to where my well was and where the water ran from the well to the house, where I knew there was a water line down in the ground, just a couple of feet down. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So I came back inside and went back on the internet and discovered a man who has become a mentor of mine, even though I've never met him. His name is Hamish Miller. He's passed away now, but he lived in Cornwall. And he was a wonderful dowser, the grandfather of all dowsers in the British Isles. He was just a wonderful dowser. I never had a chance to meet him, but I did spend some time with his wife, Bob Miller, who was an absolutely delightful, wonderful woman. When I was over in Cornwall giving a talk on ancient religions, I stayed with her in her house for the afternoon and attended a campfire with her and had a chance to talk to her about her husband and hold some dowsing rods that he had made. But his main thing was to dowse for earth energy. And I had never heard of that before. So I said, that's something I have to try. So I went out with concentrating, as I went out with my dowsing rods, I went out concentrating on earth energy. And right out in the front yard, in front of the house that we had built out here in the woods, I took the step that probably changed my life forever. I took one step, and all of a sudden, the rods just caved in on each other. They just crossed. And I didn't know what had happened. So I stepped back and I came forward again, same thing. And I discovered that I had found some kind of an energy line that was in the earth. I marked it off, got to the other side, came back from the other direction, and the same thing happened. I had discovered like a river of earth energy that was about 84.5 inches wide. Since then, I have dowsed this energy line. What is actually a ley line, a straight line with energy lines curling around it in different ways. I have dowsed it out at least a mile or so in all directions in the woods. And I've even dowsed it at one place. I found the same energy line on a sacred site that is about 50 miles north of us. And I sensed that the energy line went through that place. I looked on it on a map, and sure enough, it did. And when I went up there, I found the same line, same width, 84.5 inches long, or wide rather. And was this tremendous energy line that went down, and part of that line went right through where our medicine wheel now is. So having found that and having um, been able to communicate through movies and books that Hamish Miller has done, and then having gone to Cornwall and dowsed with a man there. I stayed at his house for a couple of days, and he at one time was the head of the British Society of Dowsers. Learned a lot from him. John Moss, great guy, terrific guy, and a wonderful dowser. And we were able to dowse a lot of the standing stones and the ancient sites in Cornwall. We dowsed the Mary Maiden Stone Circle and a number of other places that we were able to dowse. And so finding out that this sacred place on our land was right on this medicine wheel. It was right on this ley line. We decided to build our medicine wheel there. The medicine wheel itself, of course, is a Native American concept. You know, out in the West is full of them. But ours was very personal. We designed it to be partly in tune with the Lakota Sioux medicine wheel and their color concepts and their ideas. But we also combined something that was very important to me, and that's the Hindu concept of the four stages of life. And so our particular medicine wheel was my rods took me in a circle, and I went around the edge of the circle so we could see where it was, and we began to lay it out. We didn't know what we were doing. We found out only afterwards that we had done something that, frankly, to this day makes me feel like I was just really blessed and really guided. All of the medicine, I mean, all of the stone circles and the ancient sites that we dowsed in Cornwall and all over the Western Europe and all over the British Isles followed what they called, according to Alexander Thom, who was a man who studied ancient sites all over the British Isles. And he determined that the ancients used what he called a megalithic yard. The best way I can do it, I'm a carpenter, so I'm very much used to using a carpenter square, and it's a certain thing along the top. You have 2 to 3 feet along the top and 2 feet down this way, and it's done in either metric measurements, or here we use in America we use the other the other measurements, the American measurements here. But as we began to study this and began to look at how much the ancients built by the same practices that I do. When I build a house, I can't build a house without a carpenter square because it's uniform. And if you were to look at every house in our town or anywhere in the country, you would determine that the carpenters who built it used the same measurements. They all used the very same carpenter square. And you can tell this because the studs are exactly 16 inches on center, giving you 4 studs per 4 feet piece of plywood. And they were all built to those specifications. Well, Alexander Thom came to understand that the people who built the ancient stone sites, they had their own yardstick. It wasn't 36 inches long like ours. He called it a megalithic yard. Actually, it comes closer to about 2.72 feet or 32.5 inches. And he found this in every single stone circle that he ever made. He found these same measurements repeated over and over again. So when we built our medicine wheel, I didn't know anything about the megalithic yard. But it turns out that after we built the medicine wheel, we were just following what felt right to us. We had built the whole thing according to megalithic yards. For instance, we wanted a pathway that went in a circle around it. And so we decided to make the pathway 36 inches because the paper, the landscaping paper that we could put down was exactly 36 inches wide. And so we figured, okay, we'll make a circle and cover it with this, and then we'll cover that with mulch so we can walk around it. Except we put the paper down, which was 36 inches wide, but when we put stones down on both sides of it, that lowered it a little bit, and we had to make up for bulges in the ground and everything else. And it turned out that our path was not 36 inches wide as we had planned. It turned out to be a uniform 32.5 inches, which is 1 megalithic yard. And there are so many other measurements. The north-south diameter, with the stones that mark north, south, and east and west, they turned out to be at the end 4 megalithic yards out from the center stone. And it was just amazing that without our even knowing anything about it, just by following our own intention and by following our own instincts, we built this medicine wheel that was exactly built to megalithic yard standards. It still amazes me.
Perhaps due to having built it in that place with that earth energy that you dowsed.
Yes.
Some kind of magnetic force took the measurements to end up being that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the medicine wheel wanted us to build to certain specifications, And we were just fortunate enough and open enough to follow our instincts. And that medicine wheel wanted to be the size that it was and the way that it was. And that's the way it is. So today, um, I even got a kick out of it. I haven't been. It's where my wife and I go, and we meditate there a lot.
Mm.
And it's set up to the four directions, the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. And to the east is the first station. That's the station of birth. And we have a prayer there. Every day is a new beginning, a new birth. And then we move to the next station, which faces toward the south. And that's the station of the warrior, not in the sense of going out to war, but in the sense of protecting the tribe, in the sense of being the strength of the tribe. That section of life would correspond to when we finish our education, when we go out into the world, we reach a age where we begin to have children and where we begin to build here in American suburbs, the picket fence with the dog and the 2.5 kids and all the rest of the stuff. You know, the sense that you're in the prime of your life in terms of strength. Then we move around to the west, which was the position of the elder. Well, the prayer of the warrior is strength for the task at hand. So the first prayer is every day a new beginning. The second prayer is strength for the task at hand. Then we move to the place of the elder, where that stage of life where I am right now. And the elder can't do what he used to do physically, but he can provide wisdom. And so the prayer there is wisdom for the journey. And then we reach the final place, which faces toward the north. And that's the stage of death, where the final prayer there is, and at the end, rest. So whenever we go down to the medicine wheel to pray, it's those four prayers: every day a new beginning, and strength for the task at hand, wisdom on the journey, and at the end, rest. Well, that was our medicine wheel. I I didn't realize how much it had affected me until I retired from the ministry, and I don't use the Reverend in front of my name anymore, but and I haven't been inside a Christian church even for 10 years. But I have to, in order to keep my standing up, every couple of years they send me a form, a computer form, and they say what church are you worshiping at, and are you using your and all this kind of stuff. And so I was sure no one ever read those things. So on the form I wrote down Church of the Medicine Wheel. That's the church that I attend now, and it's a very sacred spot to us. And I've had some wonderful out of body experiences there. I had a physical healing there. It's been a very powerful place for us. And someday when I die, I want to have my body cremated and my ashes scattered there at the medicine wheel.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine how important it must be for you, having built it yourself, having found it through what could we call it? This esoteric method of dowsing,
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, all the experiences that you've had there. I remember in one of our conversations, you told us about one, and um, what about? Um, I wanted to tie all this with the other concepts that you express in this book that you sent me.
Yeah.
By the way, is it a book that's published?
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, it's out of print right now.
Oh, okay.
We do have my daughter and I. My daughter does all my technical stuff for me. She does all the computers and the websites and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And she and I do have some plans to produce audiobooks of some of my earlier books. So the Dragon Awakes, the book you're talking about, rediscovering Earth energy in an age of science. That was done when I was I was joined up, partnered with another man who lives down in Florida, and we had a small book publishing company. And we published that book. That was the first book we published through our publishing company. He passed away last year, and the company no longer exists. So the book is out of print. Um, there may be a couple of copies out there somewhere on the internet. I don't know. So we decided that if we're going to do audio books, one of the first ones we want to do is the audio book of The Dragon Awakes. So we hope to be able to bring that out. Of course, we know there's always the possibility of bringing another paper copy of it, but that's getting awfully expensive nowadays. Uh, Publishers don't like to, take older books like that and do it. So we were kind of stuck. But if we can do an audiobook, we're going to.
That would be awesome, and you would read it because you have a great voice, and it would be
Oh,
great to hear it directly from the source.
well, thank you. I had studio experience through being a musician, but when I was last in the studio, it was still done with tape recorders, and and now everything is digital. It's a brand new frontier for me. I don't know really what I'm doing, but I can learn. We're never too old to learn,
Yeah, and in your book, there was this part that I was reading, which was so interesting for me, where you start explaining or talking a little bit about consciousness, and
Yeah.
You start with this idea of the kind of the yin and yang circle, talking about the spiritual part of the world of reality and the material aspect, and you express something that's been so interesting for me always, this idea of our self, our essence being something that encompasses both aspects of life,
Yes.
the invisible world and the material world.
Yes.
um, Please go ahead and tell us a little bit about that.
That's that's something else that I've explored through dowsing, because um, there's nothing magical in dowsing rods themselves. They're just pieces of copper. You can use an old coat hanger for that matter, and it'll work. My favorite pendulum that I use for dowsing sometimes is just an old um, half-inch nut that came off a bolt on a piece of string, and that's my favorite. So there's nothing magical in those, but what they do is show what's going on in your body. I'm convinced that our dowsing rods, our bodies themselves are the dowsing rods. We have so much more information going through us all the time than we can possibly process. We're not even aware of it. We have evolved to become people who have to experience what we call reality through our five senses, um, sight and hearing and smell and the five senses. But all of these things are going through us. So in the book, I call it "Turn Your Radio On." What it means is, in the old days when we had television sets with before we had all connected with the wires, we just had rabbit ears, antennas, and the television would be in the room, and sometimes the picture would be a little fuzzy. So you'd get up and pick up the antenna and turn it this way or turn it that way until the picture cleared up. And that's what made me for the first time see that all of these television signals were coming through my body all the time, and I was picking them up, but I didn't know it. And so the antenna was really my dowsing rod. And by moving it this way or that way, I could begin to see on the screen in front of me that I was actually picking up these television waves that I had no idea were there. I'm sure that it's the same thing with consciousness. Um, when we were more primitive than we developed these kinds of abilities to be able to help us, but too much input would make it very difficult for us to live. For instance, we can see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet on the color spectrum. Now that's all we can see, but we know there are colors that are way above that spectrum and way below that spectrum. And it's the same thing with sound. We can hear certain decibels of sound. We know the sound goes way up and we know the sound goes way down below we can hear. Now, wouldn't it be silly if we said, because we can only see the seven colors of the rainbow, that is the essential reality when it comes to light? Of course it isn't. That's not reality. That's just a portion of reality. And the same thing with sound. If I say that the only sound that exists is the real sound, and it's real because I can hear it, my dog would have a real argument with me because my dog can hear sounds way above where I can hear. So I think it's just as silly to say that our consciousness is limited to the stuff that we can particularly feel. But when we hold those dowsing rods in our hands and ask the pertinent questions, those rods will move and cross when we ask questions that we are perceiving, but we're perceiving them with our bodies and not with our conscious brains. And that takes us into the whole idea of what consciousness is. Nowadays, there's a huge argument going on in the scientific world. You're aware of it, of course, but maybe some of your listeners aren't. That there are scientists today who absolutely insist, that consciousness is put forth in our brains. That our brains are the instigators, the generators of consciousness, and when that brain dies, then consciousness dies with it. When we go to sleep at night, and our brain theoretically, then consciousness stops. Well, I just don't think that's the truth. And it's becoming more and more aware of more and more scientists that consciousness is primal. Consciousness is the reality. And we are manifestations of that consciousness, but only one small segment of it. And there's consciousness that exists way beyond our ability to hear and to experience. And that's where dowsing is so important. With consciousness, I can ask a question that I have no idea what the answer is, but I can ask a question, and if I'm concentrating with full intent, those rods will answer a yes and no question, either open or closed. It's the very same mechanism that the computer uses. For instance, when I type a word into my computer, the computer doesn't recognize the words that I'm, all it recognizes is as ones and zeros and combinations of those. And so it recognizes the duality and then translates that into a manifestation of words on the page. I think that's exactly what consciousness does with us. We can experience through dowsing those ones and zeros, or yeses and nos. And I think we can use that to become aware of a consciousness that exists way outside of that which we can interpret. You might get the idea from how much I'm talking that I'm excited about this stuff. I really am.
Topic,
Thank you for asking.
That's very close to my heart also. It's something that I'm exploring, and I'm really thankful for what you're sharing right now.
Oh, thank you.
And especially from hearing your particular perspective, Jim, since you've been exploring this and writing about it for so long. I think that perhaps yeah, of course, on the one hand, there's this argument of the brain being a receiver or a generator, perhaps, of consciousness. That those two options, let's say.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think
it limits.
That was the whole purpose of that chapter called "Turn Your Radio On." I think we all are radio receivers, and we just have to learn how to turn it on and tap into that consciousness that's coming in. Yeah.
I believe that because of our experience in our human bodies, it's so incredible, because it feels like a first intuition or a first feeling would be that the body or the brain is generating consciousness, and that there is a world out there that I am interacting with, and when I die, it's the end. I remember when I was small thinking, yeah, when you die, everything is black. That was my concept when I was a child. Yes. And it kind of makes sense in a way to what I understand now, but looking at it differently, because in a way I was intuiting not only that, or not that kind of atheistic idea of when you die you're dead and that's it, but more like when you die there is experience, but it's a void. That was in a way what I was intuiting without knowing it.
Yes, yeah. And I think there's other ways to pick this up without getting as esoteric as dowsing. You're a musician, so you understand what it's like. Sometimes after you've learned the basics so well, and after you're in tune, and after you're no longer into that place where it's conscious thought about what you're doing, sometimes you can just become a conduit, a dowsing rod for music,
Mm.
and you play it and you hear it. And especially when you're playing with other people who are all in tune, and you realize you've just created something brand new out of nothing. And I think the answer was that, well, it wasn't nothing. I think you channeled it through the field through the Akashic field, that field of where we are all together. And when it happens and you realize that you are simply a channel for something, or a poet may feel the same thing when he or she finds just the right phrase that expresses something that you can't explain in any other way. All you can do is go, yes. Uh, I think that that's really what dowsing is, and it's tapping into consciousness. So in that sense, when we say what is the nature of reality, and we start talking about particles or electrons, I think we're way off base. Particles and electrons are simply a manifestation, and those particles and electrons clump together in various formations throughout the universe to create a manifestation. But a manifestation of what? It's a manifestation of consciousness. And this is so much more than an academic exercise, because I think this now takes us into the field of purpose. We say, why are we here? Um, why is life so difficult sometimes? Why do I have to make the decisions I make? Because we are here to become the manifestation of a consciousness which wants to become aware and experience itself, and can do so in no other way than to manifest a material reality, us, and then through us gain the experiences, many of which we don't even know we're having. I'm not even sure if I'm sometimes convinced that this is why we sleep at night. We've gathered in a day's experience of reality, but much of what we've gathered we're not even aware of. It's so much bigger than us, and we weren't even aware of the sensations we had or the thoughts we've had. And then at night we go to sleep, our physical consciousness turns off, and our brains take over, freed from that ego, freed from the essence of who we are. And in that sense, we become in reality who we are. And it processes the experiences we have, and in effect, you might say, sends them back to the collective. You know how sometimes in dreams you have the experience that the dream is sometimes even more vivid than reality? I think what you're experiencing is what we call an out of body experience. It's our consciousness that is working outside of our body, thus freed from ego and personality. And it becomes, in essence, joined with the one. We return to the source. And so I think that's a very practical thing. I've got a sneaking suspicion that one of the reasons we have, certainly not all, but a lot of the times when people, as a minister, I've worked with a lot of people who were called um, mentally incapable or mentally deficient, and they had mental problems. But then sometimes I would find myself talking to these people who we define as being mentally ill, and I would have some of the deepest, most wonderful conversations with them, spiritual conversations. And I begin to think that um, perhaps they weren't the ones who were mentally ill. Perhaps we are. We've hedged ourselves in so much, and sometimes they were able to break through to a greater reality than we ever know experiences. I'm sure that some of the medical people would have a fit with this, but I'm really wondering whether, when a person has what we call a mental disorder of some kind, our first thought is just throw some medicine at them. Give them some pills, do this or that, and make them normal like the rest of us. Well, look around the world. Normal. That's what got us into this problem. Maybe we need to become a little bit abnormal. Maybe we need to break down the barriers, think in a different way. My wife and I were talking about this today. Here in America, where we live, we're facing with so many problems at once. We have not only the pandemic, we have economic crisis in common with so many countries around the world. We have protests that now were started maybe here in America, but now they've spread throughout the world. And we're looking at how can we solve these problems? And we have these talks. We all get together and sit around. What laws do we need to pass? You know, there's not a single problem that we're facing today that couldn't be solved in an instant if people would just open up their hearts and be the people that we know we can be. Now, I'm not so naive as to think it's ever going to happen, but I do think that it should happen and it could happen. And I'm going to keep hoping that it happens because I think the next step of human evolution is not going to be found in inventing something new or a new technology. The next step in human evolution has got to be a change in the human metaphorical heart, our spirituality. If that changes, we can solve every single problem overnight. I know people argue with me and they say, oh, but people are really good. People don't, well, if people are really good, why do we have to have police? Why do we have to have armies? Why? It's because we have been blinded by our own ego and blinded by that sense of the personal rage and personal anger and everything else. If we could just throw that off, like the Buddha would say, don't let it, just don't accept it. Oh, wow, what a different world we can have. Now I think I've even moved into preaching, haven't I?
I think it's really important what you're saying, because something that I learned is that when the laws, I don't know if I'm very good at expressing this idea, but when the laws of humans come into place, that is a sign that something has been lost, something very very essential has been lost, because we have forgotten our place and in the whole context of the universe, and
Yeah.
and the quote unquote laws of the universe that that really rule our behaviors, and like for example being compassionate, being it's like we've cut ourselves from the intuition, so
Yeah.
people start acting in ways that are not very useful or positive for the collective,
Yes.
and we start putting, oh okay, so this wrong thing is happening, so let's put this law that this wrong thing isn't allowed to be done.
Mhm.
And so we they don't tend to work very well, because criminals will be criminals despite of the law, and they will find a way. But
Mhm.
but if we were to start connecting more with our hearts,
Yes.
we will start feeling, oh okay, I'm not going to do this because it doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's wonderful.
Mm.
And again, I think this is intensely practical, what we're talking about now. You and I have talked before about my work in lost civilizations. And when we go back, we find a mythology that is just full of how civilizations were lost because they made the wrong choices, because they couldn't connect. That great story in the Bible about Noah's flood, how the people were destroyed because there was only evil in the hearts of men. The great mystery and myth of Atlantis, how the people of Atlantis were filled with hubris and reached too high, and the gods brought them down. Mythology all over the world talks about civilizations that have disappeared because they've come to the very same place where we are right now, where what you and I are talking about. And they had to face a decision of either opening up their hearts or closing their hearts. And they chose to close their hearts and go with greed and go with ego, and their civilization disappeared, in some cases almost overnight. I think our civilization right now is facing a very real tipping point. It's a decision we have to make. We have the technology to destroy ourselves. We also have the technology to save ourselves. There's nothing we can't accomplish, but first, the human heart has to change.
I think we are in an interesting point of that journey. We are starting to get more, you know, more connected with our spirit in a way. We are
Mhm.
people are starting to become more interested in certain um, let's call them, yeah, esoteric topics, but
Yes, yes,
not esoteric in a weird way, but esoteric in that sense of parts of life that we haven't been very acquainted with in
yes.
different generations or in a person's life,
Uh-huh.
but which have been playing a role behind the scenes in a way, because
Yes.
whether your heart is open or whether it's not, it's still a part of you.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really fully agree, and I'm wondering if sometimes there are ancient cultures in the past who understood this far better than we did, but the wisdom that they had is somehow atrophied. It's still within us, as you say. It's still there. We can still wake it up, but we've been so much involved for so long with this whole left brain idea of not only the technology, but of the wealth that the technology can generate and the power that the technology can generate. We've been over there so long that we have forgotten that within us is also the power of total transformation. Those words that we sometimes laugh at, we say they sound simplistic. Words like love and compassion and understanding. Those are powerful words. Too many people laugh at them today. They associate those words with weakness. That's a terrible thing. I think it's a terrible thing. Um, the compassionate person is much stronger than the person who holds the button that could blow up the world. In my tradition of Christianity, Jesus said it so beautifully when he said, you know, what do you do if you gain the whole world if you lose your soul? And that's the place where we stand right now. The Buddha would echo with that. And so many of the wonderful gods from the Hindu tradition would say the same thing. It's a very important decision we're making right now. And I worry about the human race. On the other hand, I have a lot of hope. I have to hope that somehow, and that whole idea of consciousness enters into it. I don't hope because my faith is in humans. I hope because humans are part of something much bigger, and it's that something much bigger that I think is going to have its way. If we fail, I think another generation will arise, another civilization will arise. But if we win, if we come through and do what we should be doing, oh, what a wonderful future we could face.
Mm, completely. Jim Willis, thank you so much for once again a beautiful talk. Uh,
Thank you, thank you. It's wonderful. I always love being with you, Rafa. Thank you.
so likewise, um, it's so great to for me this opportunity of particularly talking with you, but also in general of this podcast, uh, having the opportunity to speak with the elders, you know, like yourself, people who have have had several years of life experience and who have, like you've told in your story, you've gone from perhaps not being very mystical, perhaps,
Mm.
to nowadays through experiences of your own, coming to accept these hidden realities, perhaps even opening your heart more, thanks to them. You know, these kind of cases, these kind of examples of people going through those changes. I think it's so important to share them, in part because of what we were just speaking of taking the world, or of tipping the balance in a way towards compassion, towards love, towards the union of left and right brain. So we have the technology. Now we are starting to wake up our hearts. It would be so great if we could continue finding the right balance between those two.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Rafa. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, so Jim, you can once again share your social media or your website so people can
Okay.
find about you.
Sure. Yeah. Matter of fact, we have a brand new website that Jen has just put up. She's updated it. And it's you can find me at jimwillis.net, www.jimwillis.net. At Facebook, it's jimwillis.author. And there's also connections on the website where you can connect with either the Facebook or YouTube channel and all that stuff. So appreciate hearing from anybody. There's a contact page on my website, and I love it when people send me emails, and I love to be in touch with people. So please do.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's really beautiful, and there's a picture of your medicine wheel, right?
Yes, right on the front page. Yes.
So people can check it out there when they hear this.
Great, great.
Jim, really, once again, thank you very much, and let's hope to see each other once again. All right?
Anytime, Rafa. Thank you.
Great. Bye bye. Thanks.